January 11th, 1939. A pale winter sun barely warms the windswept plains of the Joel River Valley. The ground is frozen, cracked in jagged patterns, and snow swirls in ghostly eddies around abandoned foxholes. Silence hangs, punctuated only by the distant rumble of artillery, like a low growl across the horizon. In the brush along the riverbank, a lone figure lies prone. A woman, barely more than a shadow in the snow, her rifle cradled carefully in her arms. Her eyes, sharp and steady, scan the frozen terrain. Each movement is deliberate, measured, almost invisible. The wind carries the faint scent of gunpowder and frozen mud. Every breath fogs in the icy air, yet she does not flinch. Far across the plain, Japanese soldiers advance. Their boots crunch in the frost. They chatter nervously, scanning the tree-line for signs of opposition. Few realize the threat that waits, barely a silhouette against the gray sky. When the first shot cracks through the cold morning air, panic erupts. The soldiers stagger, searching blindly, terror spreading as another shot falls precisely, lethally, from an unseen hand. In that frozen instant, fear is no longer rumor. It is real. It is immediate. And it belongs entirely to those who believe the land was theirs to walk unchallenged. From this frozen battlefield, the story of women snipers begins. A story of precision, courage, and the silent terror they sowed among enemy ranks. The tension in the valley is more than physical. It is psychological. The enemy does not know where to look, whom to trust. The landscape itself becomes a trap, shaped by those trained to turn invisibility into survival. The river winds like a silver blade through the snow, indifferent to the human conflict that threatens to consume it. Every heartbeat is measured, every step calculated. Every shadow could be a sniper. And in the quiet, a single thought persists among the advancing Japanese troops. Something unseen is killing us, and it is patient. The late 1930s were a period of rising tension along the borders of the Soviet Union and the Japanese-controlled territories of Manchuria. Japan, emboldened by victories in China and its rapid industrial militarization, sought to expand its influence northward. The Soviets, wary of Japanese ambitions, fortified their eastern frontiers, particularly along the Joel River, a remote and unforgiving landscape of plains, hills, and marshes that marked the unofficial boundary between Mongolia and Manchukuo. By 1939, the stage was set for one of the most overlooked but decisive clashes of the interwar period. The Japanese Sixth Army, under General Michitaro Kamatsuura, had pushed forces into Mongolian territory, aiming to test Soviet resolve and expand territorial control. Opposing them was the Soviet 57th Special Corps, commanded by General Georgy Zhukov, a rising tactician whose methods would later define Red Army strategy in the Second World War. The clash was inevitable, and both sides prepared meticulously, aware that the harsh terrain and brutal climate would be as much an adversary as each other. Soviet intelligence had begun to recognize the unique contributions women could make on the battlefield. The Russian tradition of female sharpshooters had roots in the First World War, and by the late 1930s, specialized sniper units were being trained and integrated into frontline operations. Women were selected for their patience, precision, and psychological resilience, qualities that made them extraordinarily effective in long-range engagements. These snipers were not an afterthought. They were considered tactical assets capable of shaping the battlefield. Training for women snipers was rigorous. They learned to lie motionless for hours, to calculate distances under extreme cold, and to recognize patterns in enemy movement. Their rifles, often the Mosin Nagant 1891-30 fitted with a 3.5 times PU scope, were carefully maintained, each weapon almost an extension of the soldier herself. Camouflage was essential. Snow, mud, and natural vegetation were used to blend into the landscape. Every movement, even the slightest, could mean life or death. On the Japanese side, officers underestimated the psychological impact of these snipers. Many saw combat as a domain for men, and the presence of women in operational roles was a novelty, met with skepticism or outright dismissal. Yet reports began to filter back from forward units, shots landing with uncanny accuracy. Soldiers fell before they could react, fear spreading in units that had been taught discipline and composure. The Japanese army, disciplined and aggressive, now faced a form of warfare that was as invisible as it was relentless. Winter in the Kokkin-Gol region added another layer of complexity. Temperatures regularly plunged below -20 degrees Celsius, and heavy snow often rendered traditional patrols ineffective. The Soviets exploited these conditions. Women snipers were trained to use the environment to their advantage, positioning themselves along ridges, in sparse forests, or beside frozen riverbanks where their presence was nearly undetectable. They could track enemy movements, anticipate patrol rotations, and strike at the most vulnerable moments. For the Japanese troops, this introduced an element of terror. Every frozen expanse, every drift of snow, might conceal an enemy whose patience matched the harshness of the climate. By June 1939, clashes along the Kokkin-Gol had intensified. Small skirmishes escalated into coordinated attacks and counterattacks. The Soviet command structure emphasized flexibility and initiative, allowing sniper units, including women, to act independently when conditions demanded. These units were tasked not only with neutralizing enemy soldiers, but also with creating psychological pressure, disrupting supply lines, and instilling uncertainty. Each confirmed kill was reported meticulously, both for morale and for operational adjustments. The significance of women snipers extended beyond the tactical. Their presence challenged the cultural assumptions of warfare at the time. For Japanese soldiers, who had been trained to view women primarily as non-combatants, encountering women capable of killing with precision and patience was disorienting. Letters and diaries from the period recount soldiers' disbelief, their attempts to rationalize the phenomenon within their understanding of war. Some thought it was a trick, others suspected collaboration with male sharpshooters hidden nearby. The truth was simpler. These were highly trained individuals, disciplined and deadly, embodying both the physical and psychological dimensions of modern warfare. As tensions escalated toward the summer months, both sides understood that the conflict could no longer be considered a series of isolated skirmishes. Every movement, every reconnaissance mission, every supply convoy was subject to the scrutiny of sharpshooters lying in wait. The women of the Soviet Sniper Corps were emerging as a force capable of shaping not just the immediate battlefield, but the broader operational tempo of the Soviet response. Their impact was subtle at first, a whisper of fear in Japanese ranks, but growing steadily as each engagement demonstrated their effectiveness. In this environment, the fear that would later define Japanese accounts began to take root. Soldiers, previously confident in their training and numbers, found themselves immobilized by unseen threats. The landscape became an extension of the sniper's reach. Snowbanks, tree lines, and ruined outposts were no longer neutral terrain, but zones of peril. Each advancing unit encountered resistance, not in the form of overwhelming firepower, but through precision, patience, and strategic positioning. From the frozen plains to the nervous Japanese encampments, the stage was set. The intersection of harsh terrain, disciplined training, and underestimated women snipers would create a psychological battleground, one where terror could arrive without warning and death could strike from silence. The coming encounters would reveal the full scope of their impact, and the Japanese soldiers would come to understand the unexpected magnitude of the threat before them. The Soviet-Japanese border in 1939 was a place of extremes. The Kokkin-Gol River snaked through an expanse of rolling plains, patches of dense forest, and marshy floodplains. During the spring thaw, the river swelled unpredictably, creating pockets of mud that slowed movement and channeled forces along predictable routes. For commanders on both sides, this terrain demanded meticulous planning. For snipers, it offered countless opportunities to exploit every hillock, tree, and ridge as a vantage point. By May, Soviet reconnaissance had mapped Japanese movements with precision. Scouts reported troop concentrations, supply routes, and patterns of patrols. Women snipers were deployed along likely approaches, often in pairs or small teams. They were trained to observe without being seen, to count steps, gauge distances, and calculate angles of fire before committing to a single shot. The psychological preparation was just as intense as the physical. Soldiers were instructed to remain completely motionless, to endure hours of wind and cold without alerting the enemy, and to remain aware of the subtle signs of approaching danger. Each sniper's mental discipline was tested repeatedly in training exercises designed to simulate real combat scenarios. Japanese forces, by contrast, relied heavily on aggressive forward movements, hoping that speed and surprise would secure territory before Soviet reinforcements could respond. Their doctrine emphasized concentrated attacks and relentless pressure. Yet the terrain at Kok-and-Joel negated much of this advantage. Narrow passes and open plains exposed soldiers to observation and fire from concealed positions. Japanese engineers attempted to construct defensive positions, trenches, and foxholes, but the permafrost and marshy soil made these efforts laborious and often insufficient. Small-scale encounters in May and early June began to reveal the tactical impact of Soviet women snipers. Patrols sent to scout enemy positions frequently returned with reports of unexplained casualties. Officers noted that even well-trained soldiers were hesitant to advance once they understood the threat. A single shot could neutralize a soldier within moments, and there was no clear indication of where the sniper was positioned. These isolated incidents began to erode morale, a subtle but decisive element in the lead-up to larger engagements. The Red Army's broader strategy relied on mobility, firepower, and disruption. Artillery units were positioned to provide cover, while armored vehicles and mechanized infantry could exploit any openings created by sniper fire. The women snipers complemented this strategy by softening enemy defenses, slowing advances, and creating uncertainty. Each sniper's success reduced the enemy's confidence, making coordinated attacks increasingly difficult. Japanese commanders struggled to adapt. Their training had not prepared them for an adversary who could combine patience, concealment, and lethal accuracy while remaining nearly invisible across a vast, harsh landscape. Soviet command also recognized the psychological warfare potential inherent in women snipers. Their mere presence, verified through reports of enemy fear, was a weapon in itself. Soldiers understood that even a single sniper could dominate an entire section of battlefield. Commanders encouraged the women to exploit this advantage fully. Their actions were not simply about kills. They were about shaping enemy behavior. Units would hesitate, advance more cautiously, and expend resources in ways that benefited Soviet objectives. Japanese soldiers, in turn, reacted with a mixture of disbelief and anxiety. Diaries and reports from the period often describe an almost supernatural impression of these snipers. Some accounts claim that enemy troops believed multiple shooters were operating in areas where only one was deployed. The reality was simpler. The women were trained to maximize their effectiveness, to control the rhythm of engagement, and to create the impression of omnipresence. Their patience and discipline amplified the natural advantages of the terrain, turning every ridge, forest edge, and snowdrift into a deadly tool. Early clashes also highlighted the coordination between sniper units and broader Red Army operations. Women snipers were often paired with spotters or support units that could relay information to artillery batteries. When Japanese forces attempted flanking maneuvers, snipers provided real-time updates, allowing Soviet commanders to adjust deployments and concentrate fire where needed. This integration of intelligence, precision fire, and psychological pressure began to demonstrate the strategic sophistication of the Soviet approach. The Japanese approach, meanwhile, began to fracture under the stress. Units once confident in offensive tactics now moved tentatively, seeking cover and attempting to locate invisible threats. Morale was strained. Soldiers knew the enemy was not just a mass of men, but an unpredictable, highly trained presence that could strike at any moment. Casualty reports from these early encounters document not only deaths, but injuries caused by panic, soldiers tripping over obstacles, mishandling weapons, or firing prematurely due to anxiety. By mid-June 1939, the stage was fully set. The combination of terrain, disciplined sniper deployment, and psychological impact had created a battlefield where conventional tactics were less effective. Women snipers were no longer an auxiliary force. They had become central to operational planning. Their ability to remain unseen, to inflict casualties, and to erode the enemy's confidence foreshadowed the decisive engagements to come. The Cock and Joel conflict was more than a clash of armies. It was a test of adaptability, discipline, and perception. The Japanese forces, confident in their offensive doctrine, were confronted with an opponent who could manipulate both terrain and morale. It was here, in the frozen valleys and across snow-choked plains, that women snipers would demonstrate not only their skill, but their capacity to reshape the battlefield entirely. Human angle, the women behind the rifles. The women of the Soviet Sniper Corps were extraordinary not only for their marksmanship, but for their mental endurance. Many were in their late teens or early 20s, often recruited from urban centers, technical schools, or even local rifle clubs. Their training emphasized more than shooting. It required patience, discipline, and an ability to suppress instinctive fear. Hours spent in frozen trenches, lying motionless in sub-zero temperatures, honed both body and mind. In diaries preserved by the Red Army Archives, several women described the quiet terror of the first live-fire exercises, the mental effort required to maintain focus while snow whipped across their faces and the bitter wind seeped through their clothing. Once deployed, the emotional stakes increased exponentially. Each shot carried the weight of life and death, not only for the enemy, but for the sniper herself. Failure to remain concealed could result in immediate retaliation. Yet these women also drew pride and camaraderie from their units. Small acts, a shared meal, a whispered word of encouragement sustained them during long, lonely hours in observation posts. The psychological toll was heavy, but so was the sense of purpose. They were not merely participants in the conflict. They were agents of strategy, shaping the battlefield one precise shot at a time. Tactical angle, sniper deployment, and Japanese response. Tactically, women snipers were deployed in key sectors to maximize both their physical and psychological impact. Ridge lines, riverbanks, and sparse forest patches offered natural concealment. Observation posts were often prepared days in advance, with camouflage painstakingly constructed from local vegetation, snow, and mud. Some snipers operated in pairs, one firing while the other observed, marking enemy movements and relaying information to forward command. Japanese patrols quickly adapted to this unseen threat with varying degrees of success. Early reconnaissance missions often underestimated sniper positioning, leading to ambushes and heavy casualties. Officers noted that advancing troops were hesitant, frequently pausing at natural choke points in the terrain where sniper activity was suspected. The careful integration of snipers into broader tactical operations demonstrated Soviet foresight. These women were not merely hunters of individuals, but instruments in shaping enemy movement, slowing advances, and creating strategic openings for larger infantry and mechanized units. Technological angle, weapons, and equipment. The Mosin Nagant 1891-30, equipped with a 3.5 times PU scope, was the standard weapon of choice. This bolt-action rifle, reliable in sub-zero temperatures and capable of accurate fire at hundreds of meters, gave Soviet snipers a decisive edge. Ammunition was meticulously prepared, and soldiers were trained to account for wind, temperature, and bullet drop over distance. Camouflage and optics maintenance were as critical as marksmanship. Even minor errors, a misaligned scope or exposed clothing, could compromise the mission. In addition to firearms, Soviet women relied on the environment itself as a technological advantage. Frozen rivers, snowdrifts, and forested hills acted as natural barriers, enhancing concealment. Japanese troops, trained for conventional engagements, found their usual tactics ineffective. The precision and patience of snipers, combined with these environmental advantages, transformed ordinary terrain into lethal territory, where the line between visibility and invisibility dictated life or death. Leadership angle, command and strategic integration. Commanders like Georgy Zhukov recognized the broader operational value of women snipers. Unlike conventional units, these sharpshooters could operate semi-independently, making real-time decisions based on observation and enemy behavior. Leadership emphasized initiative. Snipers were given latitude to choose firing positions, prioritize targets, and coordinate with artillery support. This decentralized approach contrasted sharply with Japanese doctrine, which relied on hierarchical decision-making and aggressive forward movements. Reports from the Soviet High Command detail how commanders integrated snipers into wider operations, using their psychological impact to complement artillery barges and infantry maneuvers. By creating zones of uncertainty and fear, snipers indirectly shaped the larger battlefield, forcing Japanese forces to divert manpower, reconsider tactics, and expend resources in ways that favored Soviet strategic objectives. Enemy perspective. Japanese soldiers confront unseen threats. 4 Japanese soldiers stationed along the Khakin GOL, encountering women snipers was both unexpected and demoralizing. Trained to respect discipline, aggression, and numerical superiority, these troops were unprepared for adversaries who combined invisibility with deadly precision. Diaries, after-action reports, and intercepted communications reveal a common thread: disbelief. Many officers struggled to rationalize how women could execute long-range kills with such accuracy, interpreting their presence as a psychological weapon beyond their comprehension. Reports describe moments of paralysis during patrols. Units advancing across open terrain often hesitated, scanning for movement that never appeared. Even when soldiers attempted suppression fire, the sniper's careful concealment rendered these efforts largely ineffective. The psychological impact compounded over days. Fear spread through units faster than casualties, undermining cohesion and initiative. Leaders tried to adapt, deploying scouts and engineers to clear suspected sniper positions, but the unpredictability and patience of these sharpshooters consistently outmatched their responses. Moral angle: women in combat and perceptions of warfare. The presence of women on the front lines challenged cultural assumptions on both sides. Within the Soviet Union, female soldiers were increasingly accepted as vital contributors to the war effort, yet skepticism remained among some male counterparts. The women snipers, however, earned respect through discipline, skill, and battlefield effectiveness. Their actions demonstrated that combat aptitude was not determined by gender, but by training, resolve, and tactical intelligence. For the Japanese, moral expectations were inverted. Soldiers raised to view women as non-combatants or supportive roles were suddenly confronted with lethal female adversaries. This inversion created not only fear, but cognitive dissonance. The enemy's actions did not align with preconceived norms of warfare. The psychological strain of confronting a capable, patient, and lethal opponent who violated traditional expectations further amplified the effectiveness of the sniper units. Technological and environmental integration angle. Women snipers were exemplary in exploiting the marriage of technology and environment. Their Mosin Nagant rifles, combined with optical scopes, allowed precise fire over extended ranges. Camouflage, winter clothing, and knowledge of terrain features were leveraged to an extraordinary degree. Snow, ice, and frozen marshes became natural allies, concealing positions and limiting enemy mobility. The Japanese, trained in conventional assault tactics, found these adaptations confounding. Conventional firepower was less effective against invisible, mobile threats. The Soviet approach demonstrates early mastery of what modern military theory calls force multiplication. A small, disciplined unit leveraging technological and environmental advantages to produce outsized effects on enemy morale, movement, and decision-making. Every sniper's action was amplified not merely by the kill count, but by the uncertainty it generated in the enemy. Leadership and operational implications. Commanders on both sides had to contend with the operational consequences of these sniper deployments. Soviet leadership encouraged independent action, understanding that small units could tie down larger enemy formations through fear and uncertainty. Women snipers were central to this strategy, bridging reconnaissance, tactical disruption, and psychological operations. Japanese commanders, meanwhile, faced a dilemma. Conventional strategies of massed infantry and artillery were partially neutralized by sniper interference. Patrols were delayed, supply routes threatened, and confidence eroded. Some officers attempted to implement counter-sniper tactics, including flanking maneuvers, smoke screens, and specialized sniper hunting units. Despite these efforts, the combination of terrain, discipline, and training kept women snipers one step ahead. Cultural angle. Historical significance of women in combat. The Kok-and-Joel conflict represents an early example of women in highly specialized combat roles, having a measurable impact on both battlefield outcomes and enemy perception. Soviet women snipers like Lyudmila Pavlichenko, whose later exploits would gain fame during World War II, exemplify a tradition that began with these early campaigns. Their presence challenged contemporary assumptions about gender and combat effectiveness, proving that strategic impact was defined not by gender, but by preparation, training, and execution. The fear instilled in Japanese units, the disruption of their operational tempo, and the psychological toll of confronting unseen female marksmen illustrate the broader significance of these engagements. Women snipers were not auxiliary participants. They were decisive factors whose influence extended from individual engagements to the planning and morale of entire units. July 2nd, 1939. The morning air over the Kok-and-Joel River Valley is brittle and gray. Mist rises from the thawing river, curling across the plains like ghostly fingers. Japanese infantry advance cautiously, rifles ready, bayonets fixed. Their orders are simple. Probe Soviet positions, assess resistance, and secure a foothold near the eastern ridges. But the Soviets are prepared, and in the frozen soil, a network of eyes watches them. Unseen, patient, lethal. Along the ridgeline, a team of women snipers has taken position. Each is camouflaged against snow, moss, and dead grass. Their Mosin Nagant rifles, fitted with optical scopes, gleam faintly in the pale sunlight. They know the terrain intimately. The curve of the river, the hollows in the plain, the slight rise that hides movement from the human eye. They are trained to wait, to calculate wind, temperature, and distance. To the Japanese advancing below, they are invisible but deadly. At 6:45, the first shots ring out. A squad of Japanese soldiers, advancing along a snow-covered trail, collapses almost simultaneously. Panic ripples through the ranks. Officers shout orders, but the source of fire remains unknown. The women maintain their calm, exchanging only subtle gestures to coordinate targets. Each shot is deliberate, calculated. No panic, no hurry, only precision. The Japanese attempt to regroup. Artillery fires in support, aiming at suspected sniper positions. But the rifles are positioned in unexpected locations, behind a ridge, near frozen marshes, along riverbanks. Every volley misses its mark. The Soviet command observes silently, aware that each failed attempt further undermines enemy morale. By 7:30, the Japanese have lost their initial momentum. Patrols are fragmented, some pinned behind natural obstacles, others frozen in hesitation. Officers try to identify the shooters, but each movement is anticipated. When a sniper shifts slightly to engage a new target, another team member signals the position with a hand gesture, allowing simultaneous strikes across multiple points. The effect is disorienting. It appears as if a single, omnipresent enemy dominates the battlefield. The women snipers also coordinate with supporting units. Small Soviet infantry detachments advance along parallel routes, exploiting areas where Japanese soldiers are immobilized by fear. Artillery shells land at precise intervals, synchronized with sniper reports relayed via runners and field telephones. The integration of stealth, observation, and firepower demonstrates tactical sophistication rarely observed at this scale. By mid-morning, Japanese casualties have escalated, and hesitation has turned into fear. Soldiers stop advancing, crouching behind ridges and snowdrifts. Commanders shout orders that are met with uncertainty. Hesitation spreads like wildfire through the ranks. For the first time, the psychological impact of sniper fire manifests fully. Fear is no longer a momentary sensation. It has become the dominant force shaping the enemy's actions. The women snipers continue to pick targets with precision, focusing on officers and key personnel. Disrupting leadership amplifies confusion. Once officers are neutralized or forced into cover, units lose cohesion. Japanese squads that had previously been well organized begin to break apart, some retreating under the impression that a much larger force is present. The sniper's effect is magnified by the perception of omnipresence. Every ridge, every tree, every snowbank is potentially lethal. The battle stretches over several hours. The Soviets exploit this psychological advantage, advancing methodically while maintaining sniper concealment. Every step taken by Japanese forces is met with uncertainty. Every decision slowed by the possibility of an unseen shot. By 10 o'clock, the front line has shifted. The Japanese have been forced to halt their advance, ceding critical ground to the Soviets. The first phase of this engagement demonstrates a crucial principle. The combination of patience, discipline, and strategic placement can shape the outcome of a battle without the need for overwhelming numbers. In this case, a small contingent of highly trained women snipers not only inflicted casualties, but destabilized an entire unit's operational effectiveness, turning fear into a weapon as potent as rifle fire or artillery. The battlefield at Gol is no longer just a contest of forces. It has become a theater of anticipation, uncertainty, and psychological dominance. The women snipers have not merely defended a position. They have redefined it, transforming terrain, visibility, and perception into tools of warfare. The Japanese soldiers now face not just the physical threat of bullets, but the intangible pressure of an unseen, omnipresent adversary. This first phase ends with Japanese forces immobilized and Soviet control of key terrain established. The next moments will determine whether the momentum can be consolidated or if counterattacks will disrupt the carefully orchestrated advantage. By early afternoon, the battlefield around Gol had transformed into a study of tension and controlled chaos. Japanese units, previously confident in their reconnaissance and numerical superiority, were now moving cautiously, their formations fragmented. Every ridge and snowdrift was treated as a potential sniper nest. Reports from forward scouts detailed the invisible threat. Shots coming from angles previously considered safe, officers felled before issuing commands, soldiers frozen in hesitation. The women snipers maintained complete discipline. Each remained concealed, shifting only when necessary, coordinating silently with fellow sharpshooters. From concealed positions, they targeted officers first, understanding that disrupting leadership would destabilize the enemy more effectively than attacking rank-and-file troops alone. Within minutes, Japanese squads found themselves leaderless, unsure of how to proceed. Confusion spread rapidly through the lines, magnifying the effects of each individual sniper shot. Meanwhile, Soviet infantry and mechanized units advanced along the flanks, exploiting the paralysis. The careful timing of artillery strikes, directed by sniper observation, created corridors of advantage, cutting off retreat paths and isolating forward units. The Japanese attempted countermeasures, smoke screens, feints, and flanking maneuvers designed to flush out snipers. Yet these efforts met limited success. The women had studied the terrain meticulously, anticipating enemy movements and adjusting their positions accordingly. For every attempted counterattack, the Soviets had prepared a response, turning Japanese aggression into an opportunity for further disruption. By mid-afternoon, the casualties were mounting. Diaries and post-battle reports reveal that Japanese soldiers were not only physically exhausted, but psychologically drained. The constant threat of unseen marksmen created hesitation, disrupted command structures, and forced units into defensive postures. Entire squads refused to advance without verification of sniper locations, slowing operations and exposing them to artillery fire. The battlefield had become a chessboard dominated not by brute force, but by precision, patience, and fear. In one particularly harrowing episode, a Japanese platoon advancing along a narrow ridge was ambushed in sequence. Each officer and key soldier was eliminated with pinpoint accuracy. Panic ensued. Some troops attempted retreat under fire, while others froze entirely, leaving equipment and supplies behind. The Soviet snipers, now acting as both hunters and observers, reported movements to artillery units, which delivered timely strikes against exposed positions. By 1530, Japanese forces had been forced to abandon the ridge entirely, leaving the Soviets in control of a critical sector. Throughout this engagement, the women's coordination and training were evident. Each sniper had internalized the principles of concealment, patience, and selective targeting. Shots were deliberate. No ammunition was wasted. Observation posts were rotated carefully to maintain vigilance, and minor adjustments in positioning allowed them to remain undetected despite increased enemy activity. Their presence alone dictated Japanese tactics, compelling an enemy trained in aggressive maneuvers to move cautiously, defensively, and often ineffectively. By late afternoon, the battlefield was defined less by territorial gains than by psychological dominance. Japanese units hesitated at every exposed location, second-guessing movements and fearing ambush. The women snipers, largely invisible, had forced an entire enemy army into a state of defensive caution. Commanders reported that the mere possibility of a sniper's presence slowed operations more effectively than traditional artillery barrages. The calculated precision and patient lethality of these women had effectively reshaped the engagement, proving that small, disciplined units could exert outsized influence on the battlefield. As twilight approached, the Japanese began a tactical withdrawal. The Soviets, consolidating positions and reinforcing key sectors, ensured that the gains achieved by sniper operations were preserved. Casualties on both sides were tallied, but the decisive factor was not just numbers, it was control of initiative. The women snipers had not only inflicted damage, but dictated the tempo and direction of the battle, leaving Japanese commanders scrambling to adapt to an invisible but omnipresent threat. The Kokken-Joel encounter stands as a testament to the impact of training, precision, and psychological strategy in modern warfare. In a single day, a small cadre of highly trained women snipers transformed the battlefield, turning fear into a force multiplier and establishing a precedent for the broader integration of women into combat roles. Their actions demonstrated that warfare was no longer defined solely by manpower or conventional firepower. Strategic patience, coordination, and psychological pressure were equally decisive. The victory in this engagement was as much a triumph of preparation, discipline, and tactical innovation as it was a product of raw strength. The Japanese retreat marked a turning point, illustrating how underestimated forces, particularly women in roles previously thought unconventional, could alter the course of operations through skill, patience, and precise application of lethal capability. The first reports from the battlefield arrived in Soviet command posts late on the evening of July 2, 1939. The Kokken-Joel Valley, once a corridor of Japanese advance, was now firmly in Soviet hands. Casualty figures confirmed the effectiveness of the women sniper units. Japanese forces had suffered hundreds of casualties in a single day, with a disproportionate number of officers and squad leaders eliminated. Soviet losses, by contrast, were relatively low, concentrated among forward infantry who had advanced in coordination with the sniper teams. Beyond the raw numbers, the psychological impact was immediately evident. Japanese soldiers, previously confident in their training and numerical superiority, were shaken by the realization that a small, disciplined contingent of unseen adversaries could so thoroughly disrupt their operations. Field reports described troops hesitating before every movement, scanning open terrain nervously, and questioning leadership decisions. Morale, once steady, was fraying. Units advanced in disorganized patterns, often falling into zones pre-selected by Soviet forces for ambush or artillery support. For the women snipers themselves, the aftermath was a mix of exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. Diaries and letters preserved from the period reveal a striking combination of discipline and emotional reflection. Many described the tension of waiting in position for hours at a time, the adrenaline of the first confirmed shots, and the moral weight of their effectiveness. These women were acutely aware that their training and preparation had produced results that went far beyond individual kills. They had shaped the movement, timing, and morale of an entire enemy force. Soviet commanders also recognized the broader operational significance. The successful integration of women snipers into frontline operations demonstrated a practical and psychological advantage, one that would influence planning for future engagements. Reports circulated detailing sniper positions, enemy reactions, and coordination with artillery, establishing a model for tactical employment of precision marksmen in combined operations. The lessons learned were immediately applied to subsequent engagements along the frontier, reinforcing the value of small, highly trained units in shaping broader outcomes. On the Japanese side, the defeat had consequences both immediate and lasting. Field commanders documented frustration and disbelief. Officers wrote of their inability to locate sniper positions, the sudden loss of subordinates, and the paralysis induced by fear. Psychological strain compounded logistical challenges. Supply movements were delayed, patrols became cautious, and the once assertive offensive strategy faltered under the persistent uncertainty of invisible threats. Soldiers wrote letters home describing the eerie precision of the enemy, often attributing supernatural skill to the snipers, an exaggeration that reflected both fear and the novelty of confronting women in lethal combat roles. The broader Soviet forces, observing the success of sniper operations, began to incorporate these lessons into propaganda and morale campaigns. Reports highlighted the bravery, skill, and discipline of women snipers, emphasizing their role as symbols of Soviet innovation and resilience. This messaging reinforced internal morale while demonstrating to the Japanese the dual impact of physical and psychological warfare. The women's effectiveness became a narrative tool, showcasing both capability and ideological strength in a conflict where perception was as important as firepower. As the first day of decisive engagement concluded, the battlefield itself bore the marks of careful planning and precise execution. The frozen riverbanks, snow-laden ridges, and sparse forests have been transformed from neutral terrain into zones of control, dictated not by sheer numbers, but by discipline, patience, and calculated lethality. The Japanese withdrawal marked a temporary reprieve for surviving units, but the psychological footprint of the sniper's intervention remained indelible. Soldiers would carry the memory of unseen adversaries into subsequent operations, altering behavior, movement, and expectations. The consequences of the engagement were both tactical and symbolic. For the Soviets, the deployment of women snipers had validated the concept of integrating highly trained, disciplined units capable of influencing enemy behavior far beyond their immediate numbers. For the Japanese, it introduced a new form of warfare, unpredictable, precise, and psychologically taxing, forcing reconsideration of conventional offensive doctrine. This initial aftermath set the stage for broader strategic consequences, demonstrating that battlefield victories were not measured solely in territory or casualties, but in the ability to shape enemy decision-making and morale. The impact of these sniper operations would echo beyond COC and GOL, informing military thinking, training programs, and historical understanding of women's roles in combat. The aftermath of the Kochan-Joel engagements extended beyond immediate battlefield outcomes. Soviet command assessed that the successful integration of women snipers into frontline operations had not only inflicted material losses, but fundamentally altered Japanese tactical behavior. In subsequent weeks, Japanese patrols operated with heightened caution, reinforcing routes and reallocating soldiers to counter perceived sniper threats. The psychological footprint of the sniper teams became a force multiplier, with fear shaping movement, engagement timing, and command decisions. Soviet military planners documented these lessons meticulously. Reports highlighted that sniper effectiveness was not merely in the precision of each shot, but in the disruption of enemy cohesion and morale. Women snipers became a model for broader operational deployment, their training regimen and field tactics codified in manuals and disseminated to other units. These reports emphasized observation, patience, concealment, and integration with infantry and artillery operations, principles that would echo in later campaigns during the Great Patriotic War. Japanese military archives, later declassified, provide insight into the depth of the shock these snipers caused. Officers noted the unprecedented stress imposed on units by unseen adversaries, with one report describing troops frozen in place, uncertain where to advance or whom to trust. Casualty reports revealed that losses among officers and squad leaders disproportionately exceeded those of rank-and-file soldiers, indicating a strategic targeting that magnified disruption. Several Japanese diaries from surviving soldiers recount fear and disbelief at being killed or wounded by women, whom they had not expected to fight at all. The engagement also had propaganda implications on both sides. For the Soviets, women snipers became emblematic of resilience, intelligence, and the modernity of Soviet military doctrine. Newspapers and radio reports celebrated their accomplishments, inspiring both civilian populations and soldiers. Their stories highlighted the equality of purpose and courage expected across genders in the defense of the motherland, reinforcing ideological narratives while emphasizing tactical innovation. For the Japanese, the experience generated reflection and adaptation. Commanders began integrating counter-sniper strategies in planning, including reconnaissance-focused patrols, increased use of spotters, and tactical reserves designed to respond to sudden, targeted threats. However, these adaptations came with a cost: slowdowns in offensive operations, heightened fear among troops, and continued disruption in morale. The long-term effect of these engagements demonstrated that psychological impact could rival, and sometimes surpass, conventional measures of battlefield strength. Historians analyzing Kochan-Joel later emphasized the significance of these operations. The women sniper teams exemplified the fusion of skill, discipline, and tactical awareness, proving that a small number of highly trained soldiers could impose outsized influence on larger enemy formations. This principle, leveraging precision, patience, and psychological pressure, would inform modern military doctrine, showing that battlefield outcomes are as dependent on perception and initiative as they are on numerical superiority or firepower. Casualty statistics underscore the tactical success. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers killed or wounded, disproportionate officer losses, and minimal Soviet casualties in sniper-led sectors. Yet the true measure of effectiveness lay not in numbers alone. Japanese operations slowed dramatically, advances stalled, and units moved cautiously for the remainder of the engagement. The battlefield had been shaped as much by fear and anticipation as by bullets, demonstrating the strategic power of highly trained sniper units. The Kochan-Joel conflict, and particularly the role of women snipers, also foreshadowed the evolving nature of warfare in the 20th century. The emphasis on specialized roles, psychological impact, and integration of female combatants challenged traditional military doctrines and influenced both Soviet and Japanese thinking about personnel deployment. Beyond tactical considerations, the engagement highlighted the importance of adaptability and the recognition of underestimated forces, lessons that would reverberate across future conflicts in Europe and Asia. By late July, The Japanese had regrouped and reassessed their eastern strategy. While they retained the ability to mount attacks, the memory of the sniper team's effectiveness instilled caution and respect. Soviet command, in turn, consolidated positions, reinforced sniper training programs, and began incorporating similar units in other theaters. The balance of power along the frontier had shifted, not just in territory, but in initiative, morale, and perception. The Kochan-Joel aftermath illustrates a critical truth of modern combat. The battlefield is shaped not only by numbers and weaponry, but by discipline, strategy, and psychological mastery. In this instance, women snipers demonstrated that precision, patience, and psychological acuity could redefine engagement outcomes, leaving a legacy that would influence military thinking for decades. The story of the women snipers at Kochan-Joel is more than a tale of bullets and frozen plains. It is a testament to precision, discipline, and the quiet power of preparation. In a single day, a handful of trained individuals reshaped the battlefield, forcing an entire army to hesitate, rethink, and retreat. Their impact was not measured merely in casualties, but in the psychological weight they imposed, the way fear can amplify skill, and the way discipline transforms small forces into decisive ones. These women challenged assumptions of their era. They proved that courage and expertise do not belong to a single gender, and that determination, patience, and intelligence can rival raw strength. They turned observation into action, concealment into strategy, and silence into a tool as lethal as any artillery barrage. The battlefield became an arena not only of survival, but of calculation, anticipation, and human ingenuity. Historically, their contributions foreshadowed a larger shift in modern warfare. As World War II unfolded across continents, the integration of women into combat roles, specialized units, and intelligence operations would become increasingly significant. The lessons of Kochan-Joel endure. Discipline, precision, and psychological mastery are as critical to victory as numerical superiority or firepower. Yet beyond strategy, there is a human story. Hours spent in freezing observation posts, waiting for the right moment, reveal the perseverance, patience, and courage required to wield such power responsibly. Each shot carried the weight of a soldier's life, yet also the responsibility of shaping an entire engagement. These were individuals who embodied resilience, demonstrating that the human element, training, focus, and courage, remains at the heart of warfare. As the snow melted from the plains of Kochan-Joel, the echoes of that day endured in reports, diaries, and memories. Women snipers had not only defended territory, they had redefined what was possible in combat, leaving a legacy of skill, discipline, and quiet yet undeniable influence. Their presence reminds us that history is shaped not only by armies and leaders, but by the courage and precision of those who operate in the shadows, whose actions reverberate far beyond what the eye can see. In the end, Kochan-Joel is a story of calculated patience overcoming assumption, of skill triumphing over numbers, and of the invisible force of courage leaving a mark as enduring as the frozen plains themselves.